Every day, somewhere in America, more than 300 innocent men, women, and children become victims of medical malpractice at the hands of incompetent and negligent doctors. Last year, over 98,000 victims were killed by doctors. More than 4 million victims are permanently injured each year. In this Insider exclusive network TV special, Justice in America, Jane and John Doe's Story, our news team visits with Ptr Siegel, partner at Siegel Coonerty, as we take you inside today's legal system, examining his legal strategies and in vivid detail, showing you the often heartbreaking stories of medical malpractice cases.
I'm a doctor, I'm a physician, a surgeon, and my wife was a victim. This was a preventable mistake, and it cost my wife. I missed the woman that my wife used to be, through no fault of her own. We no longer do any of the activities we used to do as a couple, as an individual, and as family. And family was everything, is everything to us. As a physician, I suggest for all those doctors who are having difficulties and haven't had complications, malpractice errors and mistakes, to own up to them. To be able to speak to their patients and family members and let them know what has happened, what has transpired, and be extremely transparent about your actions and how we can remedy and move forward.
This is the Insider exclusive, live from New York. It is my great pleasure to introduce Andy Siegel to the show. Welcome to the show, Andy.
Thank you, Steve.
Tell our audience a little bit about your law firm. What do you specialize in?
We specialize in traumatic brain injury, whether it be from an accident, such as a construction accident, automobile, or victims of medical malpractice. But we do have a general practice where we represent people with injuries other than brain injuries.
Before the show, you were showing me some of the cases that you've handled, and especially, I think there were about 8 or 9 medical malpractice cases where you initially filed a lawsuit and there was zero offer on the other side, right? These are complicated cases, right?
Most are.
And as you mentioned earlier, not only do you have to be up on the terminology and what the medical procedures are, you really kind of have to be ahead of the medical profession, don't you?
You have to be a step ahead. If you're not, then you're not going to be able to navigate the medicine in the courtroom.
Today we are here talking about 2 of your clients, one of who was a victim of medical malpractice, Jane Doe, and her husband, John. And they're going to be on in a little bit. Tell our audience a little bit about the case and what happened exactly.
What happened is Jane Doe had a growth on her carotid artery that needed to be surgically removed. There was no issue about that. Whenever you do surgery in what's known as the carotid space on a growth that's attached to a vessel, the most important thing that the surgeon needs to do is create control of blood in the event a risk of the procedure occurs. Meaning, if the carotid artery is nicked unintentionally, you need to be able to stop blood flow going up to the brain. And actually, the brain has a vascular system in it where blood can come back down. So you need to place what's known as a distal vessel loop just below the skull base and a proximal vessel loop in the carotid space. And then you operate on the tumor that's between these 2 vessel loops.
They're like safety valves.
What happened here is a risk of the procedure did in fact occur. There was a nick to the internal carotid artery. As the doctor was resecting the tumor off the internal carotid artery, it was peeling away as schwannomas generally do. That's what it was thought to be. It ended up being a myofibroma, and that's pretty significant because schwannomas arise from the nerve, and myofibromas arise from the vessel. So basically what happened here is the growth was separating away, no issues. Just prior to the last cut, that tissue no longer separated. It became fixed, adherent, and connected to the internal carotid artery. And at that point in time, before making that last snip, which would be a blind snip, you have to call in a vascular surgeon to make sure, you know, if there is a bleed, you have two sets of hands to control it.
Right. There was no call for a vascular surgeon, correct?
Well, what happened here, Steve, is there was no distal loop placed. And when the bleed occurred, what the doctor used to control blood coming down from the brain is something known as a peanut, a piece of cotton in a clamp.
Like a forceps.
Correct.
Yeah.
And approximately, he did apply a vessel loop, but for some unexplained reason, it didn't work. So instead, to control the bleed coming up to the area, he used a device that he should not have, something called a ladyfinger retractor. By its name, retractors retract away skin, vessels, soft tissues.
Yeah, not to be used for this.
He performs his last snip. The bleed occurs. He does not have distal control. He uses a peanut. He gets some distal control. The vessel loop fails. He uses a ladyfinger retractor. He compresses the area. After he sutures up the injury to the internal carotid artery where he was compressing the vessel with the ladyfinger, he removes the ladyfinger, and that has injury number 2 to the internal carotid artery. That now has to be repaired. Ultimately, these 2 injuries to the internal carotid artery and the blood loss and the time period to repair it was 20 minutes and 1,700 cc's of blood, which is 1/3 the body volume, coming out of nicks that are millimeters large. And that was just the tip of the iceberg in this case, the surgical injuries.
What was the end result of his errors?
So what happens now is you have a situation where a patient sustained an injury to the internal carotid artery, not once but twice, and also a compression injury. Blood flows through vessels in what's known as a laminar form, meaning it goes quickly through vessels and it doesn't stop. When blood stops, when there's something called stasis, blood can clot. And blood has a propensity to clot in an area where there was an injury to a vessel, like here. So what you must do immediately after the surgery is order and perform a carotid duplex Doppler study. And unfortunately, in this particular case, the doctor said he ordered it and it was performed and it was normal, yet there was no evidence in the hospital record that it was ordered, no evidence in the hospital record that it was performed, no formal report, it wasn't billed for. That was another one of what we call in New York departures from good and accepted medical practice.
It's interesting you bring up the point that it wasn't charged to the account, because it never happened. Because what doctor would do anything for free? Correct?
Yeah, I mean, billing is billing in the medical field, just like any other business. Their doctors and hospitals are in business to help people, but they also are businesses.
What eventually happened to Jane Doe?
What eventually happened here is in the recovery room, she was diaphoretic. She didn't look good. She was not recovering the way you would expect someone to recover. Her husband, who happens to be a physician, himself saw her in the recovery room, and he was very concerned with what he saw. He asked, "What's going on?" He wasn't given any information about the events intraoperatively, which effectively took away his ability as a physician and also as a husband to help his wife. What ultimately happened here is blood clotted in that internal carotid artery. It occluded the entire vessel. the clot broke off, and my client sustained a stroke.
And how is she today?
The permanent damage is that she has what's known as hemiparesis, or she has evidence of compromise to one side of her body.
It's almost semi-paralyzed, right?
Yes, she for what happened to her, she made an incredible recovery. Yet her life, every step, every movement, every spoken word has been compromised.
We have both her and her husband here today, and we're going to bring them on in a minute. But let's talk about the legal challenges that you faced in prosecuting this case.
Sure. Medical malpractice cases in New York are hotly defended. Rarely am I in a situation where either a defense attorney or a risk manager of a hospital calls me up and says, hey, we did something wrong here, let's see if we can resolve it. Actually, it's only happened once in 30 years of my practice. So I had to litigate this case, and this case was a case of he said, she said, and imaginary things claimed to have been done, such as a duplex Doppler, which wasn't done during the procedure. There was, in fact, according to the operative report, an intraoperative call for a vascular surgeon 3 times. Yet this vascular surgeon, when he testified at trial, said, I was sitting at my desk and nobody called me.
Yeah. Now, you bring up an interesting point. The doctor that you sued, who was one of the defendants, he was at odds with many people. He claimed, for example, with a vascular surgeon, that calls had been made. The vascular surgeon says, hey, I was here. Nobody called me. He was in a dispute with nurses too, right?
Correct.
So, I mean, there was like 4 or 5 different other healthcare professionals that disputed what he was saying.
Yeah, I mean, one of the major issues was that the on-call vascular surgeon, not the vascular surgeon he had made an arrangement with before the surgery to be there, the one who said he was sitting at his desk and nobody called me, but the hospital had a separate vascular surgeon on call. And the defendant testified that it was this doctor who, in fact, did the duplex study. But when I took her deposition, she said, I didn't do it. As a matter of fact, I didn't see the patient until after she sustained a stroke.
Yeah. Now, when you present this to a jury, you must watch their faces, and it's almost like disbelief, right? I mean, you have one person saying one thing and 5 other people contradicting him.
The doctor in his operative report said he placed vessel loops on 3 structures, yet when he went back to his record a few days later, with no office visit being had, just to go back to his own record to document things, he said at that time that he put vessel loops around 7 structures. So he added 4 structures between the time of the surgery and the time he went back to his office. In fact, when he went back to his office, in this particular note, he indicated that vascular surgery said that they would be on their way, yet they never came. Yet the testimony in the case was that vascular surgery didn't even know of a call.
Now, you eventually settled this case confidently.
Correct.
Correct. That's why we're not talking about who your clients are,
That's
using
correct.
their names or anything like that, or the doctor or the hospital.
That's correct.
You have a clear case of a doctor who has lied through his teeth. Not once, multiple times. Forged documents, fabricated documents. What happened to that doctor? Without mentioning who it is.
Nothing.
He's still practicing.
Not only is he still practicing, but this particular doctor made a complaint against the expert that came in against him, okay, saying more fabrications. And I just got word last week that that complaint has been dismissed by the College of Physicians and Surgeons.
Yeah, but what has to happen with that expert? He has to hire a lawyer?
He didn't. I told him that I would handle this for him free of charge, because he stood up to the medical community and he put his opinions, his license on the line for justice. And in return, I told him I would be happy to handle it for him, and I did.
And that's a rarity, because a lot of doctors don't want to be drawn into litigation. And I've also read and heard from doctors who say, if I testify against a fellow doctor, an insurance company might call up the hospital where I practice and say, by the way, did you know that Dr. So-and-so is testifying against another doctor, which we're covering right now, and that might not look good for that case. You might want to talk to that doctor, you know, and say, hey, do you really need to testify? They do that a lot, don't they?
Absolutely.
So your experts are drawn from where? Not New York City, right?
Sure. If I can find an expert in New York, I will use an expert from New York. That way I don't have to face, in summation, defense counsel saying, oh, he couldn't even get an expert in New York. But there are some areas of medicine, this is head and neck surgery, okay? In this particular case, there's not a great volume of head and neck surgeons, okay? Most of the doctors that I tried to review the case with in New York immediately said, oh, I know the defendant, I have a conflict, I can't get involved.
Conflict because I know him?
Yeah.
Not because he's a bad doctor and I don't want to rat him out.
I mean, just imagine how uncomfortable it could be to come to court testifying against a guy who you're going to see at every one of your head and neck surgery conferences for the rest of your career.
So let me ask you, I mean, this has been a problem in every state, you know, and for many, many years, that there's a small percentage of doctors, most doctors are good.
Most doctors are great.
1% of the doctors commit about 1/3 of the medical malpractice mistakes, okay? And have lawsuits filed against them and lose the lawsuits. My question is, wouldn't it be simple to eliminate that 1% of bad doctors?
The problem is that the medical profession is responsible for policing themselves, and they don't do a great job of it. They've come a long way over the last 30 years.
Why not?
Exposure to civil liability and lawsuits, I believe, is one of the reasons. The other reason is certain people have difficulties coming to terms with the fact that they made a human error or a mistake.
Or do you think they say, hey, I tried my best, why am I being sued?
Well,
I mean, that's a possibility too.
Absolutely, it's a possibility. I get in my office a month, maybe 10 calls for potential medical malpractice cases, and I turn 9 of them down, if not 9.5, because of a bad result. Bad results is not medical malpractice. Bad results is a doctor doing the best they could, which I believe all doctors do, yet the result was a poor one. And I tell those people they don't have cases. The types of cases I get involved in, they scream with malpractice. It's a slap in the face.
Fortunately, as I mentioned, we have Jane and John Doe here with us right now, so let's bring them on. It is my great pleasure to introduce John and Jane Doe to the show. Welcome to the show, guys.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you both for being on the show. It's been a horrible experience you went through.
Yes.
What do you remember the most about when you found out the mistakes that the doctor made?
I was very upset because what happened just changed me. Just changed everything that I knew. My life has changed. And even talking, it's very difficult to pull the words out. He just hid so much from us. It upsets me that he could have lied the way he did.
And John, you're a doctor. You know everything that happened with your wife and the mistakes that were made. What were your initial feelings when you first discovered these very bad errors?
All the steps of grief. I was angered. I was upset. I was saddened, and you know, I expected more. It was surprising to see all of the deception, all of the lies, all of the inconsistencies during the trial that occurred, and having spoken to him and the inconsistency in which he relayed to us during the time in the recovery room and even post-operatively too.
Mm-hmm. I once asked a doctor whose mother was a victim of medical malpractice. She passed away in the surgery room. Why is it? Well, what do you? How could you clean up the medical industry a little bit better, where doctors who make these horrific mistakes are still practicing medicine? What would be your suggestion? And you're speaking as a doctor.
Education, education, and education.
What about the ones that are continually making mistakes?
Then we need to root them out. It's been a long time coming. They need to be rooted out, and they need to move on and find other sources of employment. Mm-hmm. It's too dangerous.
Right. How is your life different today, both of you?
I was a very outgoing person. Nothing held me back. I just enjoyed life. We would go out to dinner. We would be around people all the time. I don't like speaking. For me to do this right now, it takes a lot for me because I feel very self-conscious of the way I'm speaking one. And I feel like people look at me and they see the deficits on my left side. I think the most important, I don't trust doctors anymore. And although my husband, I trusted this doctor. And that was one of the reasons I didn't want my husband to get him. Not that I didn't want, it was my medical. I trusted what he said. He said it was going to be an easy procedure. He was going to go in, just cut here, scrape off the tumor, and it was going to be over with. My whole life has changed.
For you, John, you not only, you hear your wife, but it's changed both of your lives.
Most certainly. We're married. We just celebrated 35 years of marriage. I mean, we know each other since we were kids. It took Jane has been a very vibrant and a strong, emotionally secured individual who was extremely independent. And now, she's no longer outgoing. She's often sad and very emotional, whereas it was quite the opposite.
Having gone through this whole legal system, what is your opinion of the American judicial system now? And the issue of justice?
Justice, it strengthens my belief in justice because of the people we dealt with and our lawyer and team of lawyers that we had.
One of the reasons we're doing this show is we've investigated, Andy's record of success in medical malpractice. It's pretty amazing, wouldn't you say?
Oh, absolutely. That's why we came to him in the first place.
Okay. Any parting words?
I just thank Andy. I thanked him a year ago, and I thank him again for being a great, great lawyer and a friend.
Well, I want to thank both of you for being on the show.
Thank you for having us.
A lot of people, you mentioned earlier, a lot of people say, I was injured by my doctor. I think I have a claim. What exactly is medical malpractice? How is it defined legally?
Medical malpractice legally is defined as a doctor practicing medicine, okay, where they deviate or depart from good and accepted medical practice and standards of care.
Those are arbitrary words. And it is up to the lawyer to prove that they departed from that standard of reasonable care. That's kind of tough sometimes.
It's kind of tough all the time. 4 out of 5 cases that go to verdict in New York in medical malpractice are lost by the plaintiff. So it's a very high burden because at the end of the day, in most of these cases, it becomes a battle of the experts. Who do they believe? The plaintiff puts on a doctor, qualified, and says that the defendant departed from good and accepted medical practice by doing something he shouldn't have done or by failing to do something that he should have done. And the defendants put on a doctor that says that's not the case.
Right. In a criminal case, oftentimes when a person is a recidivist, in other words, they've got a record as long as an arm, right? It may get brought up that this person's been in prison and out of prison, and the jurors obviously take that into account because they say, hey, this is a lifetime bad pattern of conduct, right? in medical malpractice cases, you are not allowed to present any evidence of a doctor who's been sued multiple times, are you?
No, you're not. What you could do, okay, and it's a very narrow thing, is if the doctor's been sued for the same or similar thing in the past and you have prior testimony, you can use that. But a prior act
From a different trial.
Yeah, from a different trial. But it's like an auto case. If someone ran 10 red lights, that's not going to come into evidence in an auto accident case.
What should a person do if they suspect medical malpractice in a case, whether it's against them or one of their loved ones? What should they do?
The first thing that an injured patient should do, or their family members on their behalf, is consult with an attorney. Not just one attorney.
What about getting their records first?
I mean, they can get their records first. Most of the time in medical malpractice cases, there's this terrible event, and the people really need to focus on getting better. So if they're out of care and they retain a medical malpractice lawyer, let the lawyer be the lawyer. Let the lawyer get the records, let the lawyer review the records with experts, and let the patient, let them heal themselves.
Yeah, and I want to emphasize that your part of the profession, representing plaintiffs, is always done on contingency. That means that if a person is injured and they have a case that you take on, it doesn't cost them any money whatsoever for you to put the case on.
That's correct.
That includes all the investigations. That includes the hiring of experts, which can be expensive.
It can.
I'm just curious. A normal expert I've heard from start to finish, start evaluating a case to appearing in court, can run as high as $25,000.
It can.
Right? And you got to have two of them.
Absolutely.
There's no cap in the state on medical malpractice cases, right?
No cap, but we have an appellate division that keeps things in check.
Meaning if they think the case is really out of whack, or the verdict, they'll knock it down. Is that right?
Correct.
Congratulations, on the case. And you mentioned earlier how you select clients. You turn down 9 out of 10 possible cases. What cases scream out at you that you take on?
The cases that scream out at me are just that. They scream out at me. It's like a slap in the face. Yeah. It's like, oh my God, look what happened to this person. I can't believe it. That's usually the malpractice case.
Okay, I want to thank you very much for being on the show.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for joining us. You can get more information about our guest and the issues at insiderexclusive.com.